Okay, guys, and as I said, thank you for joining me. It's a far more small and intimate group than we've had in a while, and yeah, somehow that brings an ease for me. The subject of what your purpose is or how you find your purpose it's such a massive subject. To me, it is the subject. It's the pivotal conversation. And I think a little bit of frustration exists in me because I feel like every time I've brought the subject up for other people, or the way I've been guided, there are some very stereotypical ways that we deal with the subject. There's this modern perspective where I feel that we get told with very little intelligence, with very little thought, that your purpose is just that thing that you want to do. That your purpose is just that thing that that you think is going to make you happy. And I do understand why people say that, and I do understand that it is a very important conversation because people all over the world are reaching for the fact that they're aware of the fact that they are capable of creating something better or bigger or something more in alignment. But I think we have oversimplified this conversation grossly. And I don't think that that brings us enough value. I think that we are a little bit nervous to make each other feel uncomfortable. And I think that the subject has a lot of taboos and a lot of areas of inquiry that we actually need to go into. And I'm only going to touch on those areas. And I encourage you, as I do in anything I discuss, to only take what works for you in what I say. You know, there's that whole saying that if someone starts saying to you, he can't stand you in your yellow raincoat, and you're listening to this person and they keep saying it to you, but you don't have a yellow raincoat on, then there's very little about what they're saying that you should take on board. You should just walk away being like, well, I don't have a yellow raincoat. But if you're wearing a yellow raincoat, you will know because the subject really catches you and you are aware of the fact that if you're honest with yourself, there's some things that you really need to address. And in the subject of finding your purpose, you realize there's a whole rabbit hole involved. So, I mean, if we think about it, man has for eons known that he is part of a purpose pattern that is so much greater than himself. He's always known. You can imagine a man standing on the side of a mountain, just looking down at all of existence and all of creation and just thinking to himself, what am I part of? And seeing how the animals feed upon the animals and the rivers flow and the leaves rise and grow. It's that man has been pondering purpose and meaning. I feel that meaning and purpose are so deeply intertwined. And the conversation of why I start right in the human beings of antiquity is because the next thing we realize is in this incredible thing. I mean, we know very little about what a human being is, but we do know that at some stage, how isolated this event is on a cosmic scale, how often the fact that there is this humanoid creature and this form of evolution takes place, we don't know. But what we do know is that at some stage, we got to the point where we started to think critically. And what's really interesting about that is that we develop the ability to think about the fact that we're thinking. We develop the ability to assess the experience while having the experience. I mean, that's a fascinating thing. And if you think about where this is going, I mean, that's essentially what brings you to the table of purpose, is it is some form of critical analysis. It is some form of looking at what it is you're creating amidst the dream and asking yourself, is this the way I wish to continue to dream? So without getting into any form of belief system, man has been asking himself this question for a very, very long time. And what excites me is that without going into any form of belief system, we realize that if we go through all of the ages of wisdom, all of the deep philosophical ages, the Greek ages, the we're not going to go into it too deeply, but there's one thing that you find in common, those of you that have studied religions and philosophy, is that they all agreed on a few things, only a few things. And one of those things that most philosophers, which were literally people that took their whole lives to study the human state and what it should be and what it could be, is they all agreed that to greater improve yourself, to expand, to grow was the main drive in a human being. Now, this is an important conversation because if you are willing to take on the meaning, the understanding, or the wisdom from our past teachers about the fact that man needs to reach, in whatever capacity you wish to understand the sentence, to become a greater version of himself, then that really changes what it is that people think that a purpose is. So we're not going to go into that too much, but where that brings us is that basically for thousands of years, people have really been looking beneath the veneer. And what they have found there is that there is in ourselves, embedded in our very core of our emotional and mental bodies, this calling to expand or to connect or to improve in some way. And I think it's fair to say that in some ways we have achieved that to a degree through the ages, because to a degree we have expanded, and to a degree we have grown. But we live in such interesting times because what's happened is there are so many simple things that have happened that we don't realize have affected us so deeply that they have put us in an existential crisis. One of these things is the simplicity. I mean, let me try and think of a few things. The fact that we don't go to bed when the sun begins to set, and usually what would happen for thousands of years is we'd be around candlelight. And there'd be a lot of contemplative time and time spent with intimate people that we lived with. And then we would rest and we would rise with the sunrise. And this is a really interesting conversation for the simple reason that you realize that man's purpose for a very long time was pretty singular. It was mostly survival. And those that were able to live in the ages, such as the Pythagorean eras, you know, those guys in the Greek era, a lot of them were in a time where a lot of people would call that almost the perfect environment, and they had a lot of time to contemplate. But where this leaves us in the modern day is we have a lot of distractions, and a lot of us know that to deeply connect to some form of spiritual path or to some meaning or understanding has become a lot more tricky. And if I were to bring us now present, we just took a few minutes to just look at how man has always been asking these big questions. And we've discussed that he's pretty much only agreed on one thing, and that is that there is something greater that we are reaching for, expanding. It's that we are part of a greater purpose pattern, and we can all sense it. And we all ache to be more deeply and surrendering as part of that. In modern times, though, I think the thing that I mentioned last time we spoke is I think this is absolutely critical when the discussion comes to why we become into these states of crisis. Is we mentioned a man named Scott Peck, who is, I don't know if he's passed yet, a prolific psychologist, one of the most influential of our time. And one of the things he said in his book was that one of the key things that we have done is that we've sold this lie in the last few decades. And the lie is that the purpose of life is to be happy. Now, this is a really, really complex subject, but it has to be grabbed right now before we move on, because there is a proverbial split that takes place in the road now between what you think purpose is, before we even go near the subject. Because we sell this idea, and let's look at how this outplays. The purpose of life is to be happy. Well, anybody that has had an experience with this life that you all have, because you sit before me, or anybody that studies life, like the philosophers, and perhaps like some of you in this room, knows that life essentially is extremely difficult, that life has a lot of suffering in it. And this is not something I'm projecting into the room. I mean, all of our great teachers from Buddha to Adyashanti discussed this, that essentially the thing you need to get present with is that life is a really, really difficult process. Now, this sounds negative, but what Scott Peck goes on to say is not only did the old wise sages know that this needed to be taught immediately, it puts us in almost a false sense of security as children. What we should be teaching our children is that life is filled with challenges, emotional challenges, and that all that life is about trying to meet these challenges and problem solve. And so I'm going to keep that conversation very short. But can you imagine being a 12 or 13-year-old child and your parents were pretty much discussing with you that, that things get really tricky and get difficult, and that it's, not really all about being happy. Now, this is a really weird statement, but let me put it to you this way. Someone who goes in search of happiness very seldom finds it. Someone who is just engaged in life and the processes that are at hand often finds that happiness is a byproduct of the victories that they make in their personal life. Okay, so you don't really have to agree with that, but essentially what has happened is we have billions of people that have become neurotic on many, many levels. Now, one could argue about this neurosis coming from electronics and crises and money, and I'm sure there are many factors, but essentially we do have an era of the neurotic man. And this is quite a big thing, because what we notice, especially in the last 2 decades, there's a lot of jokes about millennials and things like that, and I'm not commenting on that at all. I'm even commenting on my generations. But essentially there was this idea that at some stage, we're passing it on. We are like, okay, you must do school, then you must go study. So there's a very clear blueprint, isn't there? And then you must find someone to marry. And at this stage, you should have everything you want. And it should all go according to plan. And we all know, the ladies and the gentlemen in the room know what it feels like during our lives. If, for instance, we choose not to have a partner, we know how strong that thing that we enforce on one another can be. Like, well, why not? So why do you choose to live differently? So this is all an important conversation, because we're still pretty much talking about the youth at this stage. But can you imagine how different it would have been if your understanding of life would have been that my parents and my elders and my philosophers who helped prepare me for life have basically told me that there's a very good chance that life will checkmate me, and that this is one of the greatest adventures I'm ever going to go on. I am going to meet emotional complexities. I'm going to have to understand and come to terms with death itself and all these things, like a realistic version. And what would be really profound about this is it comes back to the original conversation. So I'm going to repeat it before we begin to actually open the subject. If you think that the purpose of life is to be happy, then the subject of being purposeful becomes very complicated for many, many reasons. But if we are willing to entertain that in some way we all have this burning to better, to expand, to grow, to face, to integrate, then we do understand that that is something that every religion and every philosophy agreed would involve a lot of dark nights and a lot of victories and a lot of laughs and a lot of tears. So when it comes to the subject of choosing your purpose, I want you to envisage that there could be 2 people sitting in a room, and the one would be so burning with his connection about what he thinks being a human being is. He refuses to let himself go quietly into the night at the end of his fragile end. He refuses to let that happen without believing that he had touched life back in the way that he really truly believed that he needed to. And I can tell you, for a lot of these guys we've discussed, they believed that that was in deep service. They had such a how it is that they fitted into the world that they didn't have these ideas that it had to be perfectly easy and joyful. There were no things that were below them. Now, this thing of happiness and what your purpose is shows up in when you guide people to try and find your purpose. One of the things you notice, and I can honestly relate to this because I have the same sort of bullshit mechanism running inside me, is we've got to this era where we have this idea where a lot of things are, we're above a lot of tasks. And I can promise you that is something that is only showing up in our century, is a lot of the holy men or a lot of the great searchers felt that the small tasks are where the absolute beauty of the divine could be found. Now, I don't speak to the truth of any of that, but the conversation of purpose and the conversation of meaning are ones that cannot be separated in any way. Why do we discuss the neurotic man of this age? Well, it's quite simple. Last week or last time we had this talk, we discussed how we had this long talk about Manly Hall, who's a lecturer, one of my great teachers. And Manly tells this long story about this neurotic man. And all that neurotic means is, I think I'm neurotic. It's just like you've got a lot of anxieties, a lot of thoughts, you know. You're not a free-flowing individual. You've got a lot of challenges and traumas. And he spoke about how this neurotic man goes to join this organization to try and bring meaning into his life and to be purposeful and to do things for the community. And he ends up bringing that neurosis into the community. And basically, he just finds that the world is a shitty place, that he can't help anyone, that people actually just want to stomp on each other. And he has a completely different experience to what the other individual has. Now, the other individual goes in this very long story, goes and joins the exact same community, and he discovers that things are completely different, that although some people are quite difficult, he discovers that truly there is so much that he can do. And he comes home each time that he's spent time with this organization, absolutely filled with just that feeling of accomplishment. So this conversation is really important because I want us, whether we are willing to be in this deep state of ownership, can we own this simple fact that you will take yourself into anything that you do? It's such a simple statement, but the being that I am, my neuroses, my negativities, my positivities, the way I love, the way I perceive the world, I take this into every physical action that I actually do. And this is really important because I've spent 10 years trying to help people and help myself, guide myself and others to a purpose. And generally what happens is that we do not realize that we go with, and we blame it on the thing that we are doing. Now, I want to be clear. I am not saying that the thing that you're doing might not be something you need to stop doing. I just want you to consider that sometimes the change is made because we are not willing to deal with ourselves. And you often see these people, I've been one of these people, they bounce around organization to organization and from one thing to another thing. And mostly they just really have a lot to say about those things and where those things are falling short. So the first level of ownership in this conversation is to sit with yourself in meditation and just ask yourself, do I understand before I go on this journey? Do I understand before I try and make this decision about this thing that I am going with, and that I am going to project all my beliefs onto this thing? So it's an interesting conversation. We speak about this neurotic man, and that I refer to women and men. I mean it in the ancient term. What's also really interesting about it is why purpose would be so powerful, because, I can tell you something I've experienced. I want to share something a little bit personal here with you guys. I have had a lot of, I mean, this is not the conversation, but a lot of you know that the majority of what I speak about has got to do with fear and trauma. And I can tell you in my personal life that I have had a lot of time to, what I used to think, reflect on my problems and my issues. And what I have realized, and I've also realized that I'm not the only one who discusses this, is that I honestly believe that there's a very, very complicated, very fine line between having issues and being self-obsessed. It's an absolutely fascinating thing. And it triggers people. So I am not saying, for instance, I still to this day have PTSD that I battle with. I've greatly healed it, but I really battle with it. And I can tell you that even in that being a very, very real thing, I am not denouncing anything that we deal with, but now there's a form of neurosis. I can tell you that if I have too much time on my hands to think about it and to send energy into it and to try and crack this thing, that usually it gets even worse. And a lot of people have known this for a very long time. You guys ever heard that saying that if you want to sort yourself out, get lost in service? And I tell you, I don't know if you've experienced it, but I've experienced it many times in my life, getting involved in something so much bigger than me and just getting so into it. And 3 months into a project, whether you are a women's soccer coach or whether you're a baseball coach for your little brother's team, or whether you're working in a soup kitchen, and it doesn't matter what you're doing, just something that just feels so meaningful, that I've often had the experience that many months later, when this project starts tapering off and I've got a lot of time for my problems, that my problems are there full force. And I must say that Manly Hall and Alan Watts, two of the greatest speakers, in my opinion, that have ever lived, both speak about how you charge these problems and these anxieties and these neuroses because you have too much time on your hands. So that's a very interesting thing. And it's a very important subject. Now, I know this sounds like I'm talking about the mental state of being, and I am, but I really need us to understand how important this is. So the second thing that would be difficult on this path of obtaining purpose would be, am I willing to ask myself the conversation about whether it is possible that a lot of the problems that I am experiencing are myself, my awareness, my consciousness, spending too much time focusing on myself. It is like an interference pattern that can happen, where you turn your own mind onto your own mind to figure out your own mind. Have you ever considered that? I mean, do you guys ever think of how funny it is? Do you know that every book that's ever been written about the human being is written by the human brain? It's the human brain studying the human brain. Have you ever thought about that? It's the most bizarre thought. Like, okay, I'm really going to write something really deep about what's going on here to try and sort out something that's going on in your mind. 9 out of 10 times you're in a spiritual crisis, or if you're looking for some greater meaning, there's something going on in your mind. And what's interesting is any solution that we can come up with is born of the mind. What a fascinating conversation. So that second thing, if you weren't clear, is to just ask yourself if you are willing to admit that there is quite a lot of self-obsession that can be involved. Now, I need you to understand something, that there's a very fine line. And as I said, yellow raincoats. Guys, you really do need to spend time on yourself. And of course, you really do need to reflect. And of course, you need to meditate. But I have seen people swing in the other direction. I'm seeing it quite rampantly in spiritual communities. People that are on this mission to heal themselves. I'm sorry to be very honest with you, because I feel like, to be honest with you, I am this person. Not even was this person, I am this person. It's part self-obsession. It's part self-obsession. And yeah. So before we move on, I essentially want to say that here's a very simple comment. The conversation about purpose is very, very hard for you to sort out in your life unless you sort out truly what you think, just at the moment, is going on with you and the universe. Can I keep it simple so I don't have to waste time? Your relationship with God. Now, I hate using short sentences because it triggers people, and some people are like, I think God is my subconscious. That's great. Your relationship with whatever you think is greater and how you fit into that thing is the most important thing you can sort out before you approach purpose. And I will show you why, because we are going to get specific at the end about how this goes really, really wrong if you do not have these things that we are discussing sorted out in your mind. And that's not an easy thing to sort out. I mean, what I think is going on with myself and how I interact with the universe changes all the time. But I can tell you that if I feel there is something greater than me that I'm connecting to and expanding to, then what I think I should be putting my time into changes very greatly. It's an absolutely fascinating thing. And this conversation about the neurosis was just simply to realize that we basically see the world how we are. Because a lot of people on their search for a meaning and a search for purpose, they don't realize that the world is not necessarily how they think it is. The world is how they are. It's like, it's a simple thing that can I give you guys a very simple example? I was running with my earphones the other day, and I had a specific type of music in my ear, and it switched over to a Cat Stevens song, and it's a really sad song. And I stopped at the robot, and there was a whole lot of people standing around, but I had this really sad song playing in my ears. And I looked at every person, and I made such deep eye contact with them. You know, I think I made them uncomfortable, even though I'm sweating. But I really, like in my thing, I was really feeling that, you know, guys, do you feel that? We are really like deep, weird creatures. And I think I just freaked people out. I know the one lady just took her eyes away from me straight away. Now, while I'm running, I asked myself, you know, if I was wearing earphones that was doing something else, like being angry, I would invoke that. Now, this is such a silly conversation, but is it? Because we don't actually realize that we are constantly playing a record on the inside. Gregory has a song playing right now. Lisa shared with us that she just had a little bit of a difficult day. So there's a specific kind of song and melody that she's trying to work through. And I think this is a really important thing, because we need to understand that your earphones are going to be on. So whatever it is that you make your decisions, some of you are sitting with really difficult decisions. Just understand that with the correct state of mind, you can bring incredible purpose to the simplest thing. Okay. So let's start to get to the nitty-gritty. I'm sitting here and I'm trying to ask myself, I feel lost. What is my purpose? What am I meant to do? So the first fork in the road here is quite simplistic, but there are two things. The part everyone's pretty good at, what would you want to do? Now, most people are pretty good at that, and not all of us, because some of us are at that point where we're not even sure what excites us anymore. I mean, guys, depression and trauma, it's real, you know, some people are at that point, but most people are pretty good at what would you like to do? And in a free way, if there was no boundaries, no. And then there's the second conversation, which most people don't want to have, is simply, what can you do? Now, remember I said that there's a lot of romanticization in the, I don't even know if that's a word. There's a lot of romanticizing, that's better, in the space of purpose, where, for instance, you'd be like, well, you know, you don't want to tone that person's shine down. You are capable of anything. Just believe in yourself and do exactly. This is like this modern motivational crap that we've got going on here. And essentially, I do think that it's true, as in you can be anything you want, granted. But, you know, at the same time, if you're on one side of the ocean of consciousness and you want to swim to the other side of the ocean of consciousness, well, it takes a long time to swim from the one side of the ocean to the other side. This is just natural realization. So these two conversations actually bump up against each other. And a lot of people just flow into the what they would like to do with no grounding, with no realism, really. And, well, a couple of things happen. I mean, we know that they can go spiraling off on a mission to do something that maybe they did, that they actually had no place in doing. So how would you know? So we've got what you could do and we've got what you can do. And what you need to do is find where those two things intersect. Now, obviously, it's not that simple, but it's really important that you keep those two conversations in your mind about that. I mean, essentially, when it comes to taking on something new, there is, if you think about it, this is quite logical, right? There are only a few things that you could do. The first thing is you could do an apprenticeship could mean anything, but what it means is learning a new set of skills. This could be anything. It could be from being a baker to an artist to a healer, anything. But you could be an apprentice, because one would assume if it is something of value that there is a lot of skill involved. And if you really want to make an impact, that you would want to learn those skills. The other form of purpose that exists very powerfully in the world, and it's one that's quite strong in the last few hundred years and is fading out now, unfortunately, is the passing on of skills. So you've had your whole life and you've had this career, and whether it is to a son or whether it is to a friend or something, you get to a certain point in life where upon retirement, you commit those last 10 or 15 years to giving your life's knowledge across to someone. And I absolutely love that. And it really has been a big part for hundreds of years of society. You also see, like, for instance, in Vedic astrology and that, you see, for instance, that only, I think it's 61, I might have this wrong, that they reach their teacher number where they're supposed to decide only at 61 what it is that they want to bring into the world. And I think this is a really powerful conversation, because I bump into a lot of people that are sitting in their middle age, or even 40, 50, 60, and just honestly thinking that it's too late for them. I brought up some of the lectures of Manly Hall earlier, and one of the things he was discussing in there is these two friends of his that were in their 60s that decided when they retired that they were going to go and learn to become doctors, and they both did their medical degrees, and I think they only finished at 72. And at 80 something, they passed away, and they spent those 10 years working in a free clinic. But what's really interesting about the conversation that was so fascinating, he actually gave the guy's name. I actually knew he was talking about. But what's fascinating about the conversation is he asks that if that person had not decided at 60 something that suddenly, after his whole life behind him, he was going to learn to be a doctor, would he still be alive? Because he said somehow this person, having this drive of being so clear what the last thing they wanted to bring into the world was, brought that person completely alive. And we know that many people do hit a massive degradation, A, when they begin to feel that they have no purpose. A lot of you know that. And B, when you get to a point of a certain age where you think that you have it all behind you. What a fascinating thing. And then another type of purpose, I'm just giving you categories, is service. Service is a very, very interesting one, you know. But no matter what kind of purpose you are dealing with, there is always two mechanisms in play. And this is pretty important, because this is where most of us, if we're honest, are wrestling deeply. There is the economical pattern of purpose, and then there is the pattern of purpose soulfully. Now, this is a really important conversation, because the economical purpose is a reality. Okay? You can be in a completely different reality. You can create different realities. I get it. But right now, in the reality that we're in, one of the only disciplines, which is a very interesting conversation, but we're not going to have, left in man is the economical discipline. In other words, most people don't do anything anymore because they don't have to. The one thing that's left that we have to do is that we have this economical pattern that we have to meet. I would say that for the average person, what would happen is that they would have a career, and I'm talking in the last few hundred years, they would have a career, and if they felt soulfully driven and really connected, we spoke about in the last talk, Rachmaninoff, Franz Kritz, those guys, I mean, they had profound careers, and then their purpose was found in either passing that on or, so my point being that they always focused on their economical pattern And then they found things to do around that. So it's an interesting conversation, because I'm sure a few people are sitting thinking, well, I'm at this point now where I need to make a decision. And a lot of us are working what one could call very practical jobs that are probably very, let's just call it economically driven, and wondering what it is that we can do. I know a lot of friends personally that have completely committed themselves to some sort of passion project. And it's a fascinating thing, because, as you know, some people have got it right, and some people have really found themselves in a very difficult place where they're unable to support themselves to quite a large degree. But those two things are always they're always in play. To me, and this is just to me, when it comes to purpose, the conversation is so interesting, because I feel that once you have a certain relationship with how, let's call it the reciprocity of life, so the giving and taking of love, and how you perceive your office, and how you perceive what's going on at the beach, and how you perceive your food when you're eating it, and your relationship that you have with things around you really, really affects this conversation, right? So your reciprocity is a really, really big part of this whole thing. I know a lot of people that are working what most people would think are very mundane jobs, but they hold such an incredible space of light, even in corporate jobs. And I think that's very, very, very possible. But now we're going to make the assumption, while we've been very practical, we're going to make the assumption that people are wanting to jump to something really, really powerful, or perhaps an entire life transformation, perhaps completely clearing the board and moving to that. Before you make that decision, not because you have to, but if you're the type of person that is in a deep inquiry about your mind, one of the first things you have to just bring into play, and it's not something you have to do hardcore, you just have to allow it to be part of the conversation, is the role that ego plays in this whole thing. And ego plays a huge role. It really, really does. And there is no way that any of us can align or agree exactly on how this would work. But what I can tell you is that we are in an era where so many people are feeling so empty and are battling so much. And I do not think it's because we're in deep trouble. I know that that's not relevant. I think it's because we are in a very powerful time. But this emptiness and this difficulty that we're living in, you see a lot of people trying to jump from a state of not feeling deeply, let's call this, there's no purpose in my actions here, thinking that if they jump right across the board and completely reinvent themselves, that they're going to find purpose there. So I would make a statement. I would almost say that if you're jumping from one area of absolute darkness to reinvent yourself, that while ego is greatly, greatly involved. And the problem is there is when we tend to reinvent ourselves. Now, as I said, yellow raincoat. If you can have this conversation and it doesn't trigger you, then it means you're asking the right questions and you go ahead in clarity. But I am not afraid to challenge myself or to challenge you guys. And ego would always, and it does, ego's favorite roles would be the roles where you get to be a hero in some way, especially a hero in a way that would make a lot of sense to your own struggle. So there would be a lot of romanticizing about being a healer or a teacher and those things. And we had a very interesting conversation last week about the fact that, I'm not going to get into it now, but a lot of teachers have said that you've got to be very careful when you go into those realms. Because as soon as you are essentially saying that part of my purpose is taking on something where I get to deter change and affect the way people choose their directions of their lives. Have you ever thought about the responsibility of actually being involved in a person's key and critical soul, like decisions that they're going to make? You know, there's that saying that what is not transformed is transferred. And I think that there are some very difficult conversations that we are not having in spiritual communities about how much this is taking place. About the fact, and I mean, how would this show up? I said we're going to get very practical. Well, how this would show up if this does apply to your own process, which once again, I must say it has applied to mine, is, for instance, if I am very incomplete with how I feel I fit into the universe, and I have a lot of fears and scars, I will transfer that into other people. I've seen this in so many ways, and I'll give you an example of how this shows up. I mean, there are some really, at any time, there are some really prolific teachers and healers and psychics and whatever it is. There are all these categories in the spiritual traditions. And what's very interesting is I noticed over the years that I could actually tell who somebody had gone to see. Because, for instance, someone that is quite afraid of what could happen to you, that is not complete on that space, that feels quite insecure in their space in the world, while this person would see clients and have, I mean, don't get me wrong, this person is incredible at what they do. And the person comes out the other side feeling really, really empowered. But here's the conversation no one wants to have. That person has taken on their fears. Because, for instance, that person has beliefs like, well, thank goodness I was there because this thing was taken away from me. And there's this kind of sense of that person has taken on their neurosis now. And this happens in so many ways across the board with advice. People give advice. And I mean, let's be honest, no one can ever actually explain how you know if you are doing the correct thing. And this is why I keep coming back to your relationship with God. But what I do know is that we go out wanting to empower and expand people. And what we tend to do a good portion of the time is give people things that they reach out to that in some ways doesn't empower them. It actually has the complete opposite. What's the word? That ends up how it unfolds for them. So the conversation we were having about whether you want to involve yourself in someone's process of decision making, for instance, to be someone who helps people make spiritual decisions. Well, I mean, that is a huge thing because that person's trajectory of their whole soul is basically approaching you. And something that we've all decided somewhere along the line, whether it was a huge ego jump to make ourselves feel better about ourselves, or whether it is just something you genuinely are growing into, because we all do that. But what happens there is, like I said, a lot of transference. And it's a really awkward conversation that no one can have for you. This is what's important. If what I'm saying is making you feel uncomfortable, I want you to understand that I'm asking these questions for you to ask of yourself. No one else dare ask these questions of you. This is not anybody's business. But I do want to say something controversial. If you are a true seeker and you truly, truly just want to align with your own divine manifestation, then you would want to know whether you are on some egoic rant or whether you are in alignment with a higher will. And this to me is the crux of it. Have you ever experienced, now to me there are many versions of things, but have you experienced the archetype of this person? I want to build the archetype for you. And it's not because I'm making a mockery, because I want you to picture that we all have this being in us, all of us, because that's how an archetype works. This person runs around and just tells everyone how it is. How it is. It's A, and if you don't do A, you're in trouble. Your soul's in trouble. Everything's in trouble. It's like the ultimate enrollment. It's the ultimate brainwash. Now, that's the archetype, right? You see it very strongly in some religions. That archetype is very present in all of us. And if we can go into a purposeful life aware of that, I mean, I could give you some keys that I've discovered for myself, but really, I just want to open up questions in you. I don't want you to hold my perspectives. But I have, like, Krishnamurti, no, it wasn't Krishnamurti. He said that yes, it was. The second you start to follow a man, please understand that you are walking away from yourself. And this is this karmic responsibility that is in this conversation of purpose. Because are you willing to be the thing that a man walks away from himself for? Or are you willing to look at it at such a deep level? So let's take, for instance, being a healer. If you're going to be a healer that leaves someone empowered and finding their own power and how they can do it and how they are the source of all things, well, all you've done is you've gone, my purpose is to be an intermediary. And in being that intermediary, well, there is kind of not much ego involved there. All you're doing is you're taking one fuse and you're helping the person who's a bit confused where it goes, and you're putting them together, and it's got nothing to do with you. How do you know if you are genuinely doing this process? Well, how do they speak about you? Are you this great healer? That person sorted me out. Well, there's a big ego problem there, because that person is certainly able to help you heal. Think about it in teachings. Does the person sit and put you in a state of inquiry and get you to really ask yourself difficult questions to find your own truths? Or does that person sit and tell you that it's blue, yellow, and green? Because, a fascinating thing, no matter what neurosis you have, I can promise you that there's always friends who have the same thing. We see this in pubs, we see this in sport clubs, we see this in spiritual, we see this in book clubs. Anybody that is holding a certain perspective at any time, you'll find company. And that's something that you can only leave people with when it comes to what role really is my ego playing in this whole thing. It's a massive thing. The need to be important, the need to deliver. And I think the karmic conversation is powerful. I don't know where my, what's it called? I can't find it. You know how you guys write comments? I wanted to lift my comment section so I could see. But anyway, we'll connect at the end. So as we travel into this last part, it's I would go as far as to say, this is the question, if that was confusing to you. There's three roles. There's the hero, the savior, and the villain. And all three of them are just as addictive as each other. And if you are on the path of the savior, I can tell you now, it is the biggest ego. Oh my God, it is one of the spirals that you cannot even believe, and for many reasons, but I'll give you a couple of them. As soon as you make yourself as the point where other people are going to source themselves, because unfortunately this is the way that we kind of do it, you are then bound by how we look at structures and hierarchy. You are then bound to have to pretend you got your shit together, because we automatically create this hierarchical structure. I have observed for 15 years how people that are in positions of power in spirituality, and power just means like a community leader. I'm not talking about bad people. These people genuinely, quite often, and I've experienced something similar in this case as well, they often have a crisis, or they really battle to continue their own search and their own path. So it's an interesting thing, but just to be aware as you're moving forward now that the savior is a very, very addictive perspective. The savior needs to deliver. The savior needs to have the answer. The savior needs to feel good about himself, because he's often run from a situation that's so dark. And the archetype has now finally found something. He's had a breakthrough. He's had a divine experience. And instead of building on that and working on this ever-present experience, he takes that thing and he's like, wow, this makes me feel good and I want to take it to the world, But at the same time, anybody can become any of these things as long as they ask themselves these difficult questions. They're just filters that you put yourself through. When you've worked with someone, whether you're teaching them or whether you're counseling them, Ask yourself those questions. What role am I playing? Am I leading this person back to themselves? Is this about me? How much, these are questions I ask myself. How much did, like, why do you want him to mention that you've really helped him? Like, why is that relevant? You know, like, what kind of feedback? And we are in these egoic spirals with spirituality. And if we can just be critical about it, if we can really ask ourselves. So what would the practicality of what we're discussing be regarding purpose? Well, this is how I would put it, is when you are willing to have that conversation and you are willing to look at the possibilities of how many people's life missions you can almost push off course. You're willing to take that karmic responsibility that the Hindus speak about. And if you are willing to do that, then I do believe that your purpose, and because you will continue to ask those questions, your purpose could be in that sphere. But I believe that we are so focused on that sphere. It's not a sphere that I can tell you those people that play in that sphere. I think one or two of you might be healers or guides, or will tell you it's not a zone you want to rush into. It might look very pretty from the outside, but it's a very difficult space to hold. But if you do choose to go that route, I want you to understand something. I was not trying to denounce it. If you are thinking of making a huge bounce, I would just feel so good that you were willing to look at those other shadow aspects that are in play, and that would be powerful. But you know what that leaves us? That leaves us with so many things. Some of the greatest experiences of my life, I brought it up earlier, but it's being a coach for someone's soccer team. Those children and just their faces and how excited they get, and teaching them respect and learning a skill and how to listen developmentally. And guys, there are purposes everywhere, absolutely everywhere. It's your relationship with God. I know this sounds so lame, but if you are feeling, and you've all had that experience, and some of you might live in that experience, you're walking along the beach or whatever it is for you, you've just had a run or a meditation and you just feel so connected to everything. You will notice that when you walk out of your gate and you go 2 blocks, there's a purpose. The purpose could be to help someone with something, or it could be to go visit a friend who's suicidal, or it could literally be to make a clip of an issue. There is purposes everywhere. It's like, one could almost say that when you start aligning to the perfection of how the divine unfurls, that all is purpose. And I know that doesn't necessarily help us all, but I will suggest one thing, that there is an ultimate purpose path. Now, this is not necessarily true. This is my own kind of perception of things. So as I said, don't take it on board. But I feel that there is, in all my meditating on the subject, I feel that there is such a profound way that your soul delivers the potential realm of purpose to you. And it's just a potential tool. This is how it would look. The big theme in your life that has caused your neurosis, or has been your great challenge, or has been the thing that has been your hero's journey. For one of you, it might be multiple knee operations, learning to become functional. For one of you, it might be Crohn's disease. One of you might have been anxiety attacks. One of you might have had terrible friendships in school that has left you deeply inadequate and separation anxiety. But what is key about using this formula, which is just a potential that you can use with your coaching clients or friends or for yourself, it's got to be the theme of your life. It's got to be that thing that is taking you your whole fucking life to figure out. I can tell you right now that mine is where a lot of these talks come from. I'm not complete on them. The one about fear and trauma that I'm always talking about. It's because I'm amidst those processes. And I talk and I make those videos because my purpose is that that's what I'm experiencing, and I want to bring value to that. So whatever your major purpose is. Now, this is where things get weird. It could be that you're a heroin addict. The opening thing to your purpose Now, why this is important? It is A, the biggest thing you've ever had to take on. B, it does not have to be complete yet. It must be such a big part of what being you is. What is the next stage? Knowing that your purpose lies in turning that stone over. Okay. Now, when you turn that stone over, you will immediately, A, be in such a state of victory when you come, okay, we all know how the hero's journey works, but let's just build this as a closing understanding. You get the call, perhaps you're an addict, you might be dying, or you have such deep depression you can't survive. It doesn't matter what it is, and you descend into the hell to face that thing, your addiction, like in my case, your disease, whatever it is that you're trying to face. And then you meet that demon in the dark. Loneliness, abuse, sexual abuse. It could be a multitude of things. It could be literally that you don't believe that you can express yourself, so you go to learn to sing. And I just want us to understand that when you come out the other side, when you finally have that victory of that thing, you will be so filled with passion, first of all, with purpose. But here's the best part. You're never, ever going to have to lie, be out of integrity, or try and be enthusiastic about something that isn't true again if you drive your purpose in that direction. This is why drug addicts make the best AA counselors. This is why people that were once abused or once didn't have good parents make the best nurses. And you get what I'm saying? Like, these people have taken something about their lives and they have turned it into their purpose. Now, I'm going to go as far as to say that this is a formula that the divine expression within us has for everyone. If you begin to tap into this possibility, you will realize that if you are at that point where you're ready to let go of mistakes and ready to let go of things just being an accident, you will realize that the stuff was all put in your path for you to turn it over to become purposeful. And I tell you, you are like a woman on fire when you actually transmute this thing and you birth your purpose. Some of you are amidst it. Some of you have done this. Now, before we move on to the next stage, why this is so important is that if a person is willing to take this on how to find their purpose, do you know what the worst thing that can happen is? They sort their whole fucking lives out. That's the worst thing that can happen. In honesty, we all know there's one thing in our lives. Every person in this room, there's one thing in our lives that we kind of know we need to do, but we just don't want to do. And we've got a lot of excuses about it. Or there are things that we know we need to tackle and we just don't want to tackle. And it's an incredible thing to realize that this problem you have, no matter how bad it is, whether it's sexual, whether it's mental, whether it is emotional, no matter how bad this thing is, this thing is exactly what you've chosen to become what it is you want to become. And it is only in facing this thing that you will feel fully purposeful. And let's say this ultimate path exists and you descend to face this thing. What you come out, and this is classic Joseph Campbell, you come out the other side having slayed this beast, or at least met it for once clearly and to its face. You come out with gifts. And it is those gifts that you can hold purposefully. And what's really interesting is the third stage is bringing this gift, which could just be love. Dead serious. It could just be like you want to make children feel safe. It could be anything, but it's usually born of the victory that you have to make. And to bring this play, the third stage now is to bring this into play in the world. And here's where things get amazing. Every limiting belief that you've ever wanted to break out of, every limiting belief that's holding your consciousness will come to the fore when you begin to try and bring this purpose into the world as a form of expression. So if that's confusing, what I mean is, I've decided now, wow, I finally, you know what, I get, let's use an example. I get abuse on such a deep level, spousal abuse, whatever. I finally heal myself. I'm sure I'm not transferring. I've definitely done the work. I'm not trying to be the hero to avoid my own shame and pain. I'm willing to have difficult conversations. And now I decide I'm going to do something in the world around this form of abuse. And you make your decision. And let's say your decision, which might change as you go, but let's you want to build a center, or you just want to offer your help on weekends, whatever it is you want to do. All the limiting beliefs that you have within you that you are not aware are there will rise when you run towards your purpose. So then you might realize, okay, like you might ask yourself, like Johan might ask yourself, why do I think I don't deserve this? Or why is it that I'm scared to put myself out there? Or now that I want to show love to other people that were also hurt or beaten, why can't I express that love? And to me, it is the most profound thing to actually realize that your purpose tends to actually lie in what is wrong with you. That would be a very simplistic way of putting it, is that the thing that you think is the biggest fuck up of your life is the most powerful purpose you could possibly find. It's not the only purpose. We had a long discussion about how purpose can be found in so many places, but I want you to just consider that if you're really looking for that ultimate purpose, well, yes, and I'm actually just reading here what Taryn said. That's exactly it. To me, then the entire thing comes full circle. And in healing yourself, you heal yourself, but then you can take that thing to another person. And I think we have a lot of transference going on, and I think a lot of difficult conversations, and we've touched on all of that. But yeah, this thing really does come down to your relationship with your environment, because when you are burning with that music, which is why I was so specific about these earphones going in, when you're burning with the fact that, for instance, I think that most true seekers get to the point where they realize that only love can teach. And when you're burning with that love, there is nothing, guys, the way that you are with your parking attendant, can be the purpose for the day, to just improve that person's day. But if you're looking to engross yourself, absolutely engross yourself in a purpose, it usually is around your own transformation. How will you know if you're on the right track? Well, if you are terrified to make the move and the jump, you're probably on the right track. Because remember what I said, all your limiting beliefs, all your things are going to rise up. So there certainly is no way to smoothen the process without it being difficult. But if you are willing to ask these difficult questions, look at the role of the ego, and also be willing to ask questions like, why does everybody think they are above certain tasks? Why is it that we have started to believe that purpose only lies in these big, fancy kind of positions and things? Because, like, we spoke that the word artisan, what a beautiful word, it's my art. The word artisan and artistry, they only split off a little while ago, where now it seems very menial, like I make shoes or I'm a watchmaker, whatever it is, And I do believe that a woman or a man on fire with some form of divine expression is going to find it anything. You literally, guys, I'm telling you now, with someone with, I don't want to use the word God again, but with love in his heart, you guys could go to your local sports complex and you could offer yourself to teach a 10-year-old bunch of kids. I promise you, and with the love you bring, you will not believe how you feel you are playing in the betterment of mankind. So I certainly didn't tell you in any way what it is that purpose is. I mean, what your purpose is, but I hope that it's created a lot of inquiry. It brings me to close is I feel that this whole conversation comes down to the relationship you have with your divine expression with God, your higher self, and to be able to keep that relationship clear. Francis's sissy, he used to go at night and used to go, not my will, not my will, not my will, but thy will be done. And how do you know when it is your will? And how do you know when it is your own egoic drive? And how do you know when it is the divine will? And these are beautiful things to meditate on. I know that there's also a Rosicrucian prayer where the lady, I can't remember the saint's name, she was a lady, she used to go, my hands and now they are yours, and my mouth, Lord, now my mouth is yours, and my eyes only see what you want me to see. And it's this beautiful prayer. And what people don't understand about that is that those people are getting to the point in their service or in their purpose where they so sincerely want to do something profound, but not born of the brain, that they begin to surrender their will to the greater love inside themselves. And that is why our following conversation that I'm going to have is going to be about tapping into the true power of prayer. Because going on the journey of purpose and going on the journey of living a life that allows you to climb in bed at night and close your eyes with a little smile, even though you're exhausted and you might have been scraping pans for 12 hours. And it's just a beautiful thing. So that's the next conversation we're going to have is a lot of us, if we're honest, very young, we've thrown the idea of prayer away. And we have the idea of meditation, but we think it's just to relax. We don't think that there can be a deep interchange of clarity and information. And that's what we're going to be talking about, tapping into the true potential of prayer. And the real conversation is very similar to tonight's. It's the conversation about whether it is your egoic manifestation or something deeper in you. And I think love is the guide. So thank you, guys. Thank you for diving a little bit deeper into this. I'm just going to end this recording if I can remember how. I think perhaps up here.